Informed consent. Nurses need to know and apply legal aspects in their many different roles. For example, as client advocates, nurses ensure the client's right to informed consent or refusal, and they identify and report violent behavior and neglect of vulnerable clients. Legal aspects also include the duty to report the nurse suspected of chemical impairment. Informed consent is the client's approval, or that of the client's legal representative, to have his or her body touched by a specific individual. Consents, or releases, are legal documents that indicate the client's permission to perform surgery, perform a treatment or procedure, or give information to a third party. Informed consent is an agreement by a client to accept a course of treatment or a procedure, after being provided complete information, including the benefits and risks of treatment, alternatives to the treatment, and prognosis if not treated by a healthcare provider. Richardson, 2013, reminds us that the goal of informed consent is mutual decision-making between both professional and patient over the treatment option that the patient wishes to receive or not to receive. However, little research has been conducted to determine if clients realize this purpose of consent. A review of literature by Leclerc, Coolers, Skeltinga, Spawen, and van der Wil, 2010, found that neither healthcare providers nor clients are well prepared for the informed consent process. Usually the client signs a form provided by the agency. The form is a record of the informed consent, not the informed consent itself. There are two types of consent, express and implied. Express consent may take the form of either an oral or written agreement. Usually, the more invasive a procedure or the greater the potential for risk to the client, the greater the need for written permission. Implied consent exists when the individual's nonverbal behavior indicates agreement. For example, clients who position their bodies for an injection or cooperate with the taking of vital signs infer implied consent. Consent is also implied in a medical emergency when an individual cannot provide express consent because of physical condition. Obtaining informed consent for specific medical and surgical treatments is the responsibility of the person who is going to perform the procedure. Generally, this person is the primary care provider. However, it could also be a nurse practitioner, nurse anesthetist, nurse midwife, clinical nurse specialist, or physician assistant who is performing procedures in their advanced practices. Informed consent also applies to nurses who are not independent practitioners and are performing direct nursing care for such procedures as nasogastric tube insertion or medication administration. The nurse relies on orally expressed consent or implied consent for most nursing interventions. It is imperative to remember the importance of communicating with the client by explaining nursing procedures, ensuring the client understands, and obtaining permission. There are different types of consents. Admission agreement. Admission agreements are obtained at the time of admission and identify the healthcare agency's responsibility to the client. Immunization consent. An immunization consent may be required before the administration of certain immunizations. The consent indicates that the client was informed of the benefits and risks of the immunization. Blood transfusion consent. A blood transfusion consent indicates that the client was informed of the benefits and risks of the transfusion. Some clients hold religious beliefs that would prohibit them from receiving a blood transfusion, even in a life-threatening situation. Surgical consent. Surgical consent is obtained for all surgical or invasive procedures or diagnostic tests that are invasive. The physician, surgeon, or anesthesiologist who performs the operative or other procedure is responsible for explaining the procedure, its risks and benefits, and possible alternative options. Research consent. The research consent obtains permission from the client regarding participation in a research study. The consent informs the client about the possible risks, consequences, and benefits of the research. Special consents. Special consents are required for the use of restraints, photographing the client, disposal of body parts during surgery, donating organs after death, or performing an autopsy. Informed consent indicates the client's participation in the decision regarding health care. The client must be informed, in understandable terms, of the risks and benefits of the surgery or treatment, what the consequences are for not having the surgery or procedure performed, treatment options, and the name of the healthcare provider performing the surgery or procedure. A client's questions about the surgery or procedure must be answered before signing the consent. A consent must be signed freely by the client without threat or pressure and must be witnessed. Witness must be an adult. A client who has been medicated with sedating medications or any other medications that can affect the client's cognitive abilities should not be asked to sign a consent. Legally, the client must be mentally and emotionally competent to give consent. If a client is declared mentally or emotionally incompetent, the next of kin, appointed guardian, appointed by the court, or durable power of attorney has legal authority to give consent. Mentally or emotionally incompetent clients. Declared incompetent. Unconscious. Under the influence of chemical agents such as alcohol or drugs. Chronic dementia or other mental deficiency that impairs thought processes and ability to make decisions. A competent client older than 18 years of age must sign the consent. In most states, when a nurse is involved in the informed consent process, the nurse is witnessing only the signature of the client on the informed consent form. An informed consent can be waived for urgent medical or surgical intervention as long as institutional policy so indicates. A client has the right to refuse information and waive the informed consent and undergo treatment, but this decision must be documented in the medical record. A client may withdraw consent at any time. To give informed consent voluntarily, the client must not feel coerced. Sometimes fear of disapproval by a health professional can be the motivation for giving consent. Such consent is not voluntarily given. Coercion invalidates the consent. It is important, therefore, for the person obtaining the consent to invite and answer client questions. Cultural perspective also needs to be considered when clients are asked to make decisions about a procedure or treatment. For example, informed consent in the United States is based on the principle of autonomy. That is, each person has the right to decide what can or cannot be done to his or her person. The competent adult client is expected to have the autonomy to make his or her own healthcare decisions. In contrast to this individual perspective, people from other cultures, e.g., Southeast Asia, Native American, may apply a group perspective to decision-making. They may believe that another member of their family or group or tribe should make the decision. The nurse can provide culturally responsive care by asking clients if there is someone they would like to be present when information or discussion of their healthcare treatment occurs. It is also important for the client to understand the written material. Illiteracy in the United States continues to present a challenge as it pertains to recognizing and understanding words commonly used in consent forms. Reminder: an informed consent is a legal document, and the client must be informed, in understandable terms, of the risks and benefits of surgery, treatments, procedures, and plan of care. The client needs to be a participant in decisions regarding health care. Minors. A minor is a client under legal age as defined by state statute, usually younger than 18 years. A minor may not give legal consent, and consent must be obtained from a parent or the legal guardian. Parental or guardian consent should be obtained before treatment is initiated for a minor except in the following cases: in an emergency, in situations in which the consent of the minor is sufficient, including treatment related to substance abuse, treatment of a sexually transmitted infection, human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, testing and acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS, treatment, birth control services, pregnancy, or psychiatric services. The minor is an emancipated minor, or a court order or other legal authorization has been obtained. Emancipated minor. An emancipated minor has established independence from his or her parents through marriage, pregnancy, service in the armed forces, or by a court order. An emancipated minor is considered legally capable of signing an informed consent. If given sufficient information, a competent adult can make decisions regarding health. A competent adult is a person over 18 years of age who is conscious and oriented. A client who is confused, disoriented, or sedated is not considered functionally competent. A legal guardian or representative can provide or refuse consent for the incompetent adult. Informed consent regulations were originally written with acute care settings in mind. Nonetheless, ensuring informed consent is equally important in providing nursing care in the home. Because the provision of home care often occurs over an extended period of time, the nurse has multiple opportunities to ensure that the client agrees to the plan of treatment. A challenge to informed consent in the home, however, is that the plan may affect other members of the family and, if so, they need to be consulted. Exceptions. 3 groups of people cannot provide consent. The first is minors. In most areas, a parent or guardian must give consent before minors can obtain treatment. The same is true of an adult who has the mental capacity of a child and who has an appointed guardian. In some states, however, minors are allowed to give consent for such procedures as blood donations, treatment for substance abuse, treatment for mental health problems, and treatment for reproductive health concerns such as sexually transmitted infections or pregnancy. In addition, certain groups of minors are often legally permitted to provide their own consent. These include those who are married, pregnant, parents, members of the military, or emancipated, living on their own. These statutes may vary by state. The second group is individuals who are unconscious or injured in such a way that they are unable to give consent. In these situations, consent is usually obtained from the closest adult relative if existing statutes permit. In a life-threatening emergency, if consent cannot be obtained from the client or a relative, then the law generally agrees that consent is implied to provide necessary care for the client's emergency condition. The third group is people with mental illnesses who have been judged by professionals to be incompetent. State mental health acts or similar statutes generally provide definitions of mental illness and specify the rights of those who have mental illnesses under the law as well as the rights of the staff caring for such clients.